the discovery of gold in California touched off the greatest mass movement of people since the Crusades.
Without the gold strikes, the settlement of the West would have probably been pushed back at least 50 years.
Some people came here ready to go into those mines and pull out that gold. Other people came here ready to sell to those miners. People came here to get rich.
What did it take to hit pay dirt?
This is awful. I really don't like this at all. The blasting cap is real sensitive. If you hit it against a rock, it could go off.
What were the risks?
Back in 1863, there were over 100 people that were murdered and robbed.
And what's happened to these gold rush towns today?
Many of these towns are melting back into the earth.
Join us as we head to California and Montana to explore the tools and tech of these western boom towns and discover how we're keeping alive these gold rush ghost towns.
Fire the hole.
Hi, I'm Steve Thomas, and welcome to Bodie, California, a place where a man could get rich, get drunk, get a girl, and get killed, all in the same day. By 1880, gold was pouring out of the surrounding hills, and Bodie was booming. It was also the meanest, most violent, most sinful town in the West. Around here, you didn't greet your neighbor with a good morning. You asked the question, do we have a man for breakfast? Which meant, was anybody killed last night? Well, it's settled down a little bit. Bodie is a ghost town. In fact, it's the largest unrestored gold rush ghost town in the West. In the second half of the 19th century, it was common for California gold rush towns to go through boom and bust cycles, and Bodie was no exception. Nestled in the remote hills east of the Sierra Nevada mountains, Bodie boomed in the late 1870s after huge gold deposits were discovered in underground mines nearby.
Suddenly you had a mining camp that went from a few hundred in a space of months to 10,000 people, bringing miners, merchants. You have ore wagons, wagons full of supplies coming and going. You had the smells of bakeries, hotels cooking. The mines are up on the hill 24 hours a day working. It was just an amazing confluence of everything human in the West in one place.
For new towns like Bodie that exploded virtually overnight, it was essentially every man for himself. The sheriffs and constables were rarely to be found, and it was the local miners' organization that dispensed much of the justice. Keeping order was a different story.
Bodie's boom time was a pretty wild and rowdy time. People were armed. You expected everybody in Bodie did have a gun.
Robberies, stage holdups, and street fights were common. After a hard day's work in the mines, liquor flowed freely in the saloons that lined a mile-long Main Street, and things often got out of hand. Murders were almost daily events.
Shortly before the boom time, there was a family in San Jose that was moving to Bodie, and they overheard their little daughter, about 4 years old, in her prayers at night. She said, "Goodbye, God, we're going to Bodie." It meant I'm going to the land of no right or wrong. It's just wild and woolly Bodie.
By 1883, as mining claims tailed off and Bodie began its decline, about $14 million in gold had been taken from the nearby mines, worth about $250 million in today's dollars. Bodie's now a state historic park, with only 5% of the original structures still standing. It's preserved in a state of arrested decay, meaning it'll be maintained to look just the way it does today. The California Gold Rush can be traced to a single event. In 1848, as the Mexican War came to an end, California was about to be acquired by the United States. It wasn't yet a state. It wasn't even a territory. On January 24th of that year, James Marshall found a gold nugget half the size of a pea near John Sutter's lumber mill on the American River. The news set off a chain reaction around the world of historic proportions.
It was this magnet for people from all over the world, and they came by the hundreds of thousands to California. And without the discovery of gold, they never would have done that.
They converged on the foothills of the Sierra Nevada mountains, the Mother Lode region, by land and by sea.
There were three ways, essentially, to get to California. You could travel around Cape Horn. In most cases, you'd go by sailing ship. You could go by steamship to the Isthmus of Panama or Nicaragua, and then cross overland, and then pick up another ship and go up the Pacific coast and get to California. The third way was simply to go overland, from the Missouri River, which was the jumping off point for the overland trail, to the Sacramento Valley. Some people rode horses, some rode in wagons, but for most of them it was a really long walk.
San Francisco became the springboard for prospectors arriving by sea. The population there exploded from 600 in 1848 to 25,000 just 2 years later. The rush for gold was on.
Though I had sailed for California with little faith in the gold stories, when I landed, my skepticism turned to amazement. Everywhere, piles of gold dust, from fine-scale river gold to coarse nuggets.
The first gold discoveries in California were made in stream beds, where miners used the power of running water to wash away whatever wasn't gold. They called it placer mining. Working conditions for these prospectors were primitive and backbreaking.
The placer miners typically spent 10, 12, 14 hours a day, waist deep, in water that was coming off the glaciers of the Sierras. The sun would be beating down on their heads. So from the waist up, they would be boiling hot. From the waist down, they would be freezing.
Well, I wanted to find out for myself. So not too far from John Sutter's lumber mill, where the gold rush began, I joined some modern-day prospectors to try my hand at placer mining.
You're agitating the material using motion in the water. The quality of gold, the fact that it's very heavy, it's 19 times heavier than the water. We're hoping that it's going to sink to the bottom. When they discovered gold, within weeks, there were miners on the river, American River, and they were panning. That's all they had going for them was pans in the first few weeks. They knew nothing else. They were not very good at it. They were using frying pans, dinner plates, Indian baskets, anything they get their hands on to pan with. And they were doing the same thing we're doing. They were down there hoping.
All right, but the smart guys quickly figured out
they could sell them pans.
That's right. Boy, I just started, and I can already see the future of this operation. Day after day, in the rain, feet in the water, hands
right.
cold already.
The health would be in jeopardy. Came all the way to California for all this.
This is awful. I really don't like this at all.
So you would have been the sort of miner that lasted about a day and a half.
You got it. Now, wait a minute. What's the stuff I see already? I see these flakes here. Is that Pools gold?
Probably, if it's on top.
Yeah. That's what.
That's okay. This is how we learn.
That's what keeps you going.
See, kind of a circular motion. You want to get that gold down where you can trap it and capture it later. And going from that circular motion, you go to a side-to-side motion like this, and you start to tip the pan.
And already the carpenter in me is thinking, what can we build? It'll make the work a little easier.
And we're heading that way real
That's
soon.
great.
We're on to the next one. What we have here is the next level of mechanization in the gold rush. This was introduced only a couple months after discovery, so we're talking like around March 1848.
Our object here is to try to get the heavier material, the gold, the black sand, and the river garnet, all down here.
So
now,
the name of the game in gold mining is take a whole bunch of gold-bearing gravel
right.
and keep sifting it
Right.
until the heavier gold sinks down to the bottom
Classify
and you
it.
can retrieve it.
Correct.
So the more material you can move through and sift, the faster you're going to get rich. So the big stuff gets filtered out here,
Right.
the finer stuff gets filtered
Lays
out
into
here.
the apron.
And it runs to the back. The material washes all the way to this end, and these little cleats of wood in here called riffles are going to actually capture the gold. Okay, now with the addition of water here, your technique is going to be like a jerking motion like this, because you want to get some agitation in there.
So this is really just a quick way to remove the big chunks.
The
you
big
still
stuff.
have to pan this stuff.
The lighter earth.
But still, there must be a faster way to move more material through.
There sure is, Steve.
What you have your hands on there is a chain pump. It's a very simple device, but it works very, very efficiently, as you can see.
So the water travels down through a chute.
These are flumes.
So you'd have 3, 4, 5 guys dumping in
Yep.
dirt.
You'll notice now we have a flow of water that's working for us. Now you're going to be dragging the rest of that gravel down here and moving it back and forth over the riddle iron. You notice it's the same riddle that you saw in the cradle. Okay, fellas, you can lift the long tom now, and I'll pull the ripple box out. So you're digging it out right there, right behind the
And
the
you would
ripple.
take this and pan it.
You would pan that out.
When
And
you actually found gold, what did it look like?
Here's a nice 9.9 pennyweight. That's
That-
just shy of a half of an ounce.
That is a nugget.
that would make your day.
Yeah. How much is this worth now?
Approximately $800.
And back then?
About $8.
But more commonly, miners would find flakes, not big nuggets.
That's right. We stuff typical like that.
Tiny little flakes.
But they add up.
What are these worth now?
Not too much, probably $10, $12.
And back then?
Pennies.
Pennies. So when it came right down to it, you were doing a whole lot of work for pennies at a time.
That's
know.
right.
But there was money in the dirt.
And there was always hope.
Now
was
we've
always
had
A
a
big
chance.
find.
That's right.
The gold rush transformed the very definition of success. Acquiring material wealth had always been part of the American dream. If you wanted to get ahead, you worked hard and put your shoulder to the wheel, and in time, your reward would come.
California overturns all of those notions, because in California, the race is not to the diligent, it's to the swift. The gold rush taught Americans to take risks. If you were willing to court failure, then the rewards could be beyond the dreams of anybody before the days of the gold rush.
By the early 1850s, just a few years after gold was discovered at Sutter's Mill, the placer gold deposits in California were drying up. Miners looking for the next big strike crossed the Sierra Nevada mountains into Nevada. Some went south into Arizona, and some went north into Idaho and Montana.
Well, Montana was a pretty big, unexplored place at that time. Prior to that, there were some fur trappers, a few traders, Indian traders up there, but very little else.
By 1863, the year before Montana became a territory, thousands of gold seekers had arrived.
It was the lure of gold that really got Montana populated, and it was one of the biggest gold rushes after the gold rush in California.
Those are the Bitterroot Mountains, once covered in snow, the Centennials, and nestled in the hills, the town of Bannack, Montana, first territorial capital. In the 1860s, in between Bannack and Virginia City, was the richest placer gold strike in Montana history, on par with the big strikes in the Klondike and California. You had the ideal combination of isolation and the prospect of fantastic wealth, which meant that in Bannack, like many gold rush towns, the name of the game was law and disorder.
Gold was discovered in July of 1862. There was a group of prospectors from Colorado. They discovered gold about 3 miles downstream from here. And they knew right away they were into something pretty rich.
Word spread like wildfire. By that fall, hundreds of prospectors were panning for gold up and down the creek. There were no stores in town, and you brought or shot whatever you needed to survive.
You had people that were just out trying to make their fortune. You had people that were trying to escape the Civil War. You had outlaws that were running from the law. So you had all kinds of people, good and bad.
Bannack was home to some notorious outlaws.
Henry Plummer being the most famous outlaw of all. He was a former lawman in Nevada City, California. He was sentenced to San Quentin for killing a man out there. After he was released, he made his way here to Bannack, and in the spring of 1863, he was elected sheriff. It was believed that he was secretly leading a gang of road agents. That were the outlaws of those days that would hold up stagecoaches, wagon trains, and relieve the miners of their gold dust. It's said that back in 1863, there were over 100 people that were murdered and robbed.
How did Plummer and his gang meet their just reward?
Well, a group of citizens formed a vigilante group. They met secretly. They signed oaths swearing allegiance to one another and that they would do no wrong, that they would do this for the good of the people in this community, since they believed that the law was actually behind all the robberies and murders.
The outlaws ended up giving themselves away.
Yes, it's kind of ironic. They believed that they had a secret password, and that password is, "I am innocent." So when they were being questioned by the vigilantes, as soon as they said, "I'm innocent," they assumed that they were part of the gang and guilty. And in a period of about 1.5 months, they hanged over 20 people, including Sheriff Plummer and his 2 deputies, right up the draw there at the gallows one cold January evening.
The horror of what I saw was photographed on my memory. The bodies of 5 men with ropes around their necks hung limp from a roof beam. I trembled so that I could scarcely run toward home.
The vigilantes ruled the Bannock area for another 3 years before life began to settle down. During that time, prospectors began to tap into rich gold veins underground. Throughout the West, placer mining had removed the most accessible gold near the Earth's surface. Other mining technologies evolved that dug deeper. In the 1850s, large companies in California started using a technology called hydraulic mining. High-pressure hoses would literally blast away entire mountains and hillsides, and the gold was then extracted from the residue. Powerful enough to kill a man 200 feet away, hydraulic mining was environmentally devastating and ended by the turn of the century. Huge dredges also began to be used to scoop out entire riverbeds and streams. And miners searched for gold in underground veins. It was called lode mining. The Drumlummon Gold Mine, under this mountain in Marysville, Montana, was originally staked around 1876 by a miner named Thomas Cruz. He was clearly onto something, because from 1883 until 1950, over 500,000 ounces of gold were recovered, worth more than $255 million in today's dollars. So how was lode mining done in the late 19th century? We came to the Drumlummon to find out.
Steve, looks like you're ready to go underground here. Protective footwear, you got sturdy clothing on, you got a miner's belt with the battery for your headlamp, protective D-ring. The battery has a cord that goes up to your headlamp on the side here. Turn the lamp on and off and focus it. You got hearing protection on your hard hat, safety glasses, and over on this side of your belt, this is a self-rescuer. In case of a mine fire, it converts the carbon monoxide to carbon dioxide. It'll burn your mouth because it's an exothermic reaction, but don't spit it out. So I think we're ready to go.
Okay.
Okay. Oh, by the way, grab that box of dynamite when you come.
Even though the mine has been closed for several decades, the Drumlummon's owners believe there's still plenty of gold in the mountain. Mining engineer Larry Hoffman and I came to see for ourselves.
Here we're about 700 feet into the 1,600-foot tunnel. This timbering keeps the unstable ground in this section of the mine from falling down on us. We're about 400 feet below the surface.
Is it safe?
Yeah, it's safe, but you can see where that timber's kind of sagging here. Welcome to the hoist room of the Drumlummon mine.
Wow. Wow. Look at this.
It's about 150 feet across there. And up above your head is a brick arch that was put in 1884. 10 to 12 courses of brick thick. You can imagine the scaffold that it took to put in that arch.
Why is it so big?
It supports the fractured rock and the rock that was mined from the vein from here to the surface.
What was in this space?
This space was used for the hoisting engine and the air compressors that powered the mine.
The hoisting engine was a large electric winch that raised the ore and lowered miners and supplies into the shaft. So this is a shaft, not just a little pool of water?
This is a shaft.
Like an elevator shaft in a building, it took miners 1,200 feet down, with levels 100 feet apart and tunnels snaking into the narrow but deep veins of gold. So if I toss this rock in, going down 1,200 feet?
1,200 feet. It's going to take that rock a couple of minutes to get to the bottom through the water.
I don't think I want to fall into the shaft.
No, your gear that you're wearing would drag you down and you just watch the square of light disappear behind you.
Ooh, that gives me the chill.
Here's one of the gold veins that was mined back in the old days. You can see the slot that goes to the surface. Each one of those timbers held a platform that the miners worked on to mine that rock.
What were they using for tools?
I'll show you over here. From the Middle Ages until after the Civil War, the only way that miners had to drill into the rock was to use hardened steel or iron bits on the drill steel, and one man at a time was called single jacking. One man holding and rotating the steel, another man swinging a hammer was called double jacking.
How fast could they drill through rock?
A man single jacking probably could do 6 inches in an hour, maybe a foot in softer rock.
And I bet you didn't want to mess with those guys in the
You
dark alley.
You didn't want to arm wrestle them.
Next evolution.
After the Civil War, with the demand for more mine production, they developed compressed air drills like this one. They were called slugger drills because the steel is clamped into the piston. Everything goes back and forth. I'll show you what it looks like.
You bet. I'll stand back.
Okie doke. From the piston drill, technology evolved into the light hammer drill, the heavy hammer drill, faster and faster drilling.
Why drill to begin with?
To get dynamite behind the rock, to blast the rock out, get the gold. Rock in the box, Pard, rock in the box.
At the end of the 19th century, the Drumlummon mine was the most productive gold mine in Montana. Miners would get to the gold veins by drilling into the rock face and planting dynamite, sometimes using as many as 300 sticks at a time, and then blasting the wall into small pieces of ore. Mining engineer Larry Hoffman is showing me how it was done. So that's 7 of 8 holes that we have to drill.
One more hole to drill.
So these are long tubes, like a sausage, and they're kind of squishy.
Yeah.
What's in there?
It's actually an emulsion, ammonium nitrate based, with accelerators in it.
And what are you attaching to it?
This is the non-L detonator.
Non-electric
detonator. It's a blasting cap with a hollow tube that's filled with the same material that's in airbags.
Larry's plan is to detonate the dynamite in 3 separate blasts that go off in close sequence. To maximize the amount of rock we'll blow out from the wall, we have to drill the holes in a precise pattern. Next, we insert the blasting caps into the sticks of dynamite.
The blasting cap is real sensitive. If you hit it against a rock or hit it against a rail, it could go off. Once the flame front reaches here, the actual cap goes off.
And then the cap sets off the
dynamite.
So this is the lethal combination.
Right.
Not every day you get to prime a stick of dynamite.
So now the next step is to tamp them home at the end of the hole. You tamp it enough that you can feel the cartridge break.
So you want to split that sausage casing so that the plastic material oozes out?
Yes.
Last one?
Last one.
How many sticks in all?
There's about 27 altogether, I think.
The holes are now filled with dynamite, and the non-electric detonator tubes are connected to a single blasting cap.
When we've got the area cleared, then we'll connect these wires, string a lead wire back to a detonating device.
Down the tunnel.
A safe distance away from the blast. And then, when everything's out of the way, we'll come back and connect it and shoot this puppy.
We slipped behind a rock wall about 300 feet from the blast. All right, Larry, I've got the hoses, wires, and tools all cleared. I think we're good to go.
Everybody's out?
Yep. And then it's time to let her rip.
Okay, fire in the hole.
This is awesome. Is there any gold in here?
Well, we'll take a couple of samples back and we'll assay them. But in mining, we always say, you always drive one more round because you might be just a foot from $1 million. On the other hand, you might be 1,000,000 feet from $1.
Well, speaking around, I'm buying.
Hey, maybe we got enough gold to buy.
In lode mining, the gold is still embedded in the ore. To extract it, the ore was transported to stamp mills, where it was pulverized by huge cast iron rods called stamps.
Again and again, 1,000 pounds of weight, of force would come crashing down on the rock and just crush it, till it was dust.
Wherever there were gold mines, there were stamp mills, running 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Some mills contained as many as 50 stamps. We searched far and wide for a 19th century stamp mill that still worked, and we finally tracked one down in Nevada City, California, painstakingly restored by mining preservationist Mike Nevius. So what's the process? I can see the ore carts up top there.
Yeah, the ore gets dumped into the hopper, and then just the weight of the ore brings it all the way down to a feeder mechanism that feeds it to the stamps, and then it crushes the rock.
And these are the stamps. How much do they weigh?
They're 1,000 pounds each.
And it just pulverizes the ore.
That's right.
Can you crank it up? This is cool. A hand crank gasoline engine. That is marvelous.
This is a jaw crusher.
And its purpose was?
To bring the ore down from the larger rocks to a uniform size so they could be fed into the stamp mill. It would have come on down by gravity flow, drop it in here.
The crushed rock would fall into a feeder tray and then would be pushed by water under the stamps to be pulverized. So Mike, how does it work?
Well, the shaft is turned by the belt, and the camshaft turns and lifts the lifter, drives the stamp up, and it drops of its own free weight onto the ore.
So those pulverized ore. The ore and water would drop onto large copper sheets coated with mercury. The gold particles combined with the mercury to form a sludgy alloy called amalgam. The amalgam was scooped into buckets and heated in a retort to about 700 degrees. The mercury evaporated, leaving behind a spongy form of gold, which was then melted and formed into solid bars. Next, mining and processing gold was one way to make a fortune, but there was another way: mining the miners. For the prospectors who rushed out west in the late 19th century, mining for gold was often backbreaking work. It rarely paid off.
For many, it was very much like a lottery, and for a few people who struck it rich, there were very, very many people who came home empty-handed.
But there was another way to make a fortune, by selling goods and services. It was called mining the miners.
The miners required all sorts of products, all sorts of provisions, everything that constituted civilized life back east. They would pay top dollar for clothes, for pants that wouldn't wear out.
Merchants the world over saw an opportunity they couldn't pass up. In 1853, Levi Strauss expanded his family's New York dry goods business to San Francisco. 20 years later, he pioneered the use of metal rivets that kept denim pants from falling apart. At first called waist overalls, these jeans were a huge hit with miners who needed clothing that wouldn't fall apart after months in the mine. Other entrepreneurs were also doing brisk business. Folger's Coffee originated when James Folger from Nantucket, Massachusetts, came out west with his brothers to mine gold, but then discovered there was a market for pre-ground coffee. John M. Studebaker built and sold wheelbarrows to miners. In the next century, he and his brothers made automobiles. But whatever equipment miners used, it had to be durable, and much of it was made from cast iron. In the early days, equipment was shipped from foundries back east. Within a few years, though, wherever there was a mine, a foundry was often operating nearby. Today, only a few of these foundries are still standing. We located one just several miles from where the California gold rush began. By the 1870s, Sutter Creek, California was a gritty industrial mining center. 7 stamp mills operated 24 hours a day. There were a couple of brickyards, a brewery, and countless boarding houses, brothels, and saloons. And here on Eureka Street was the Knight Foundry, which pioneered some of the most innovative mining technology in the West. Founded in 1873 by Samuel Knight, a brilliant inventor and engineer, the foundry manufactured machinery and parts that helped power the gold mines of the California Mother Lode region. The Knight Foundry is believed to be the oldest continually operating water-powered foundry in the United States. Andy, it's 130 years ago. Knight Works is in full swing. Paint me a picture of what it's like.
Well, it's a bustling shop. There's somebody standing at every one of these big machines doing work. There's probably 20 machinists in here. The people that work on these machines, many of them were trained by Knight. There'd be kids hanging out at the door of the foundry every day.
These are original machines, by the way?
These are machines. This place was fitted out by about 1882. It was pretty much as you see it today.
Looks like about 125 pounds of water pressure in this pipe. Where does the water come from?
Comes from 45 miles back in the mountains by a canal system of flumes and ditches, comes to the edge of the valley here, and then drops in a pipe almost 500 feet down. And that gravity pressure in the pipe gives us all this pressure. The pressure comes in here through a valve, in through a jet, small jet really, into this. The water comes out of here about 110 miles an hour.
So it's like a big squirt gun coming in there. This was Samuel Knight's signature invention, the water-powered impulse turbine, or the Knight wheel.
The wheel starts turning, it's going by at about 50, and when the water hits the bucket, it does a U-turn, and then drops down at 0. It gives all of its energy to the wheel, almost all of it.
This was Knight's genius.
Yes, this is the most efficient machine ever invented. You figure a steam engine that they were using then would get about 6% of the energy out of the wood it used. Or an automobile only gets 15% of its energy out of the gasoline. This wheel from the get-go got 70%, and today they make 92%. This is how we create our hydroelectricity in California, is a wheel like this.
And this one wheel runs most of the shop.
That's right, and it was invented by Samuel Knight.
Can we crank it up?
Oh, sure, but if we do, we would be very wet, so let's put the hood down.
Okay.
Turn the valve slowly.
You can hear the water coming through the pipe. Keep going. Sounds like a jet engine taking off, doesn't it?
Yeah, keep going.
Okay, more.
Here we go. Wheel's beginning to turn.
Wow, look at that.
The main belt of the power system running all of the machines in the machine shop.
That is amazing. Most of the equipment at the Knight Foundry was made of cast iron. The iron casting process for all tools, large and small, such as this gear used in a drill press, always began by fashioning a wooden model in the pattern shop. The wooden pattern would then be placed in a box and packed in a special mixture of sand used for casting. The pattern was then carefully removed, leaving its impression. Molten iron was poured in, and the piece took shape. After the iron cooled, the piece was transferred to a large lathe, where holes were milled to precise specifications.
Well, here's one of our real treasures. This is the oldest working machine tool in the United States. Knight bought this used. It came around Cape Horn in a clipper ship during the gold rush, and it's an 1850 New Haven lathe.
This type of bed lathe was used in the manufacture of almost every kind of machine operating in gold mines and stamp mills. Here, the center hole in the drill press gear is being fine-tuned, as it was done more than a century ago.
Well, there's your bevel gear, Steve, finished and ready to go to work.
That is cool, Joe. Thank you. Andy, it's amazing to think that this is just one of thousands of individual custom parts that the Knight Foundry produced.
And whole machines, from the smallest pump to the most massive mine hoist, all created in this wizard's workshop of Samuel Knight.
It's an amazing piece of history. Thanks for saving it for us.
Our pleasure.
When we return, the past meets the present, and a Montana gold miner's cabin rises again. In the 1860s, in the mountains of western Montana, placer miners struck gold in First Chance Gulch. They were soon hunting for the underground sources of the placer deposits and worked their way 6 miles up the side of this mountain. At the top, they found what they were looking for, and the town of Garnett was born. By 1897, over 1,000 people lived and worked here, seeking their fortunes in the underground mines. Garnett was one of the last of the Montana boom towns, and today is one of the country's few remaining gold rush ghost towns. Was this the extent of Main Street?
Oh, no. Main Street extended to several blocks of buildings side by side until a major fire in 1912 wiped out about 3/4 of the town. This is the general store, and this was opened by Frank Davy, who was an Englishman. He came up here and he spoke the Queen's English. He was very prim and proper. And if you can imagine an English butler in a movie, that would be Frank Davy. He would get up every morning and put on a 3-piece suit with his celluloid collar, and he was all business. And he smoked a pipe and he looked a little stern. And but he had a heart of gold. He extended credit to the miners over and over again.
One of the great colorful characters of
He was.
Montana history. Some of the miners' cabins have decayed badly and are in desperate need of restoration. So the residential neighborhood was upslope of downtown.
It was. It was up here on the hillside. The road to the mine is right down there.
So there are a lot more cabins in the old days?
There sure were. This whole area was filled with cabins. But through the years, they burned, a lot of them through coal oil lamps tipping over and chimney fires. So that makes it that much more important that we preserve what we have here.
So the surviving ones, how are they faring in this Montana climate?
Well, let's take a look at this cabin up here.
Well, I know they were a little bit shorter back then, but I don't think they were this short.
No, not really.
What happened to the building?
This is a great example of Mother Nature reclaiming a log structure.
How so?
Well, when the logs don't have a foundation underneath them, they just rot into the ground.
So you're telling me that at one time, this was a window at eye height?
It was. This was normal height. Hard to believe, but it sunk down. That many logs had rotted out underneath it.
So how do you go about bringing a structure like this back?
Well, for that answer, you have to talk to Bernie Weisgerber.
Will do. Thanks,
All right.
Alan.
Thank you.
Bernie, you're a log cabin restoration specialist who has worked all over the United States. What causes these buildings to melt into the ground?
Biggest problem, Steve, is water and dirt. If you've got water and dirt in contact with logs on the building, you're going to have a deterioration of the fabric.
So when these buildings were built, the miners who built them just took that first log, set it right on the ground?
Yeah, probably the logs were skidded down off of the hill here out of native material, brought right down here, dug in place, and just laid up from there. The base logs were completely deteriorated, especially back into the hillside right there. We had this tree, which was growing up and shoving the building over here. We had the ground that was swallowing it up. We got a crew here from Glacier National Park who specialize in log cabin restoration, stabilizing this building.
What's the goal?
The goal is to keep it for your grandchildren. I mean, that's always the goal with our historic structures, is to keep them in perpetuity.
First step?
First step would be these whalers right here.
Whalers?
Whalers. Before anything else happens, the building has to be stabilized. So these 4x6s are sandwiched. There's one on the inside. They're bolted together with this rod here and just clamped in place.
So that keeps the logs from rolling off each other when you start moving the building around.
It does.
Once the building is stable, what's next?
Next is excavation, and we have to dig a ditch in here, cut this all out, cut the grade down, and so we can jack it up. And what we do for that is use a system of bell-based screw jacks that just screw up, take the weight, and this new high-tech thing here, an air pillow, which the compressor is pretty neat. It's just sort of a pillow that raises the building up. But the most important thing is the cribbing. The cribbing are these square cants that are cross-hatched in here underneath the building and then wedged up with these miner's wedges. And that really is the safety mechanism for this building. And this job is a really safe job, the way I look at it. The name of the game in historic preservation is to save as much original fabric as possible in the cabin. And you can see where this is original right here. This is a new piece that's been chunked in here from the crown end back to this lap joint, which is not quite finished yet.
Wouldn't it have been easier to replace that whole log rather than having to make those fancy cuts?
It sure would have been. But as you can see, this portion of the log is still sound, so we save every inch of original fabric.
You can readily tell the new from the old. Does that bother you?
Not at all. I'd rather have it be that way. I don't want somebody coming in here and mistaking our work today for the original builder's work.
So once these repairs are made, what comes next?
Well, we have to notch one and bring it over and put it up underneath.
What are you cutting?
This is a steeple notch. This is a type of notch that the original builders used when they constructed this cabin. This is a reverse steeple, and it fits over top of this notch just like this. This is the fastening system, and it works on gravity, that holds this whole cabin together. There are no screws, no nails.
So you've got dozens of these notches to make in the course of this reconstruction.
That's right. And
So
the chainsaw's a great tool.
What did they use before chainsaws?
Single bit axes.
Steeple notch, all done.
So you've got notches on both ends of the log. The log is cut to length. Is it ready to go into place?
Not so fast. We got a surface on the interior that was flattened or hewn, and we got to do that to it before we put it in the cabin.
What do you use for that?
Use the broad axe for that.
Wow, look at these tools. These look as old as the cabin.
Yeah, actually they are. These three right here are late 19th century. This is my grandfather's broad axe. This is a slick. You push it, it's kind of like a big chisel, but you don't drive it like a chisel. This is another broad axe, and the one I'm going to use for the hewing.
Under the lifted cabin, we attach the new log to the one just above it. Ultimately, the new base logs will rest on concrete pillars to help keep them from rotting.
Come this way about 2 feet.
So the idea is that we got to drop it into this hole, lift it up with these straps, and secure it, and then add the next log beneath this one.
And then just put the next log in, and that'll hold that one up.
Well, I got a feeling it was a lot easier to build it from the ground up the first time than from the sky down the second time.
Absolutely. You need to lift your end up so we can slide back past that dirt. Okay.
Good, sit her down. It took the crew 3 weeks to stabilize the cabin. The goal, as always, is to maintain it in a state of arrested decay. The work to save Garnett's past is a fight taking place in other gold rush ghost towns. It's a fight against time. The rush for gold transformed the American West. Hundreds of thousands of people came here from the world over, and many of them stayed. These towns generated tremendous wealth, and they were magnets for fresh thinking and innovative technology. These weathered old buildings contain the stories of the men, women, and children who lived and died here. If we don't maintain them, they'll turn to dust, and the stories will be just words without a place to make them real. By preserving these gold rush ghost towns, we keep alive the story of the American West. For the History Channel, I'm Steve Thomas, and thanks for watching.